The whole line had gone the particular kind of quiet that wasn't kindness. The quiet of 8 strangers all deciding at once that the old man at the till was somebody else's problem. He stood there in a brown wool coat that had been good once, maybe 30 winters ago, holding a folded grocery list in 2 hands like a hymn sheet, and he was not moving, and he could not seem to understand why everyone behind him had started to lean. Renata Boudreau saw it before she heard it, because there was nothing to hear. That was the thing nobody else in the line had figured out yet. The cashier, a girl of maybe 17 with a name tag that said Priya and a voice already fraying at the edges, had asked the old man the same question 3 times, each time louder, the way people do when they've decided the problem is volume. "Debit or credit, sir? Sir, do you want your receipt?" And each time the old man had only watched her mouth, and then looked down at the little card machine she was holding out, his face folding into something that wasn't confusion exactly. It was closer to apology. He kept tapping the wrong corner of the screen, and then pulling his hand back like it had burned him. Ren was 4 people back, basket hooked in the crook of her elbow, and she had a thought she would be ashamed of later. "Please, not tonight, I just need to get home." It had been a 14-hour day. She'd done the early shift, mopping the long fluorescent halls of the seniors' residence out on the highway, then come straight to her 4 hours stocking shelves here at the grocery, and her feet had stopped being feet sometime around 3 o'clock, and become 2 blocks of cold ache she dragged around. Jonah was waiting with the neighbor upstairs. She had $31 on the debit card and a hydro bill on the counter at home that she had already turned face down so she wouldn't have to look at it. The plan was bread, the cheap peanut butter, milk, a box of the no-name macaroni Jonah liked, because the bunny on the front made him laugh, and out. In and out, home. Before her son fell asleep on the neighbor's couch again. "Sir, there's people waiting," Priya said, not unkindly, "just tired, just young. Do you have cash? Cash is fine too." The old man's lips moved. No sound came. He pressed the folded list flatter against the counter as though smoothing it would translate it. Behind Ren, a man in an expensive black parka exhaled through his nose, loud, performative. "He's been up there 5 minutes," the man said to nobody, to everybody. "Some of us have somewhere to be." And it was that, more than anything, that did it. Not the old man's trembling hands. The contempt in the parka man's voice, the easy cruelty of a person who has never once stood at a counter and been unable to make himself understood. Because Ren knew that counter. She had stood at versions of it her whole childhood, translating, smoothing, fighting, her small body planted between her little brother and a world that kept deciding he was somebody else's problem. She set her basket down on the floor. She didn't decide to, not in any way she could have explained. Her feet, those 2 cold blocks, carried her up the line past the parka man and his sigh, past a woman scrolling her phone, past a kid in a hockey jacket, and she came up beside the old man at the counter, and she did the only thing that had ever worked. She moved into his sightline, gently, the way you approach a deer, and she lifted her hands. "Hello," she signed. "Can I help you?" It was the first complete sentence her hands had made in 9 years. They remembered it before she did. The shapes came up out of some deep place that had nothing to do with the grocery store or her aching feet, and the old man, Ren would never forget this. The old man looked at her hands and then up at her face, and his whole body changed. The bracing went out of his shoulders. His mouth came open. For 1 second he looked at her the way a man looks at a window after months in a room with no windows. Then his own hands came up, stiff with cold and age, and he signed back, slow, almost disbelieving. You can talk?" "Little," Ren signed, and she felt her throat tighten in a way she hadn't expected. "Slow, I'm slow, tell me what you need." His name was Anders. He told her that first before anything else, the way a man introduces himself when he hasn't been properly seen in a long while. Fingers spelling it out, Anders, and then the sign he used for himself, a little tap near his temple that she understood was his own private name, the one his wife must have given him. He was trying to buy 3 things, he signed. Coffee, your cream he liked, the 10%, in the small carton, because the big one always went off before he finished it now. And a card. A birthday card. His granddaughter in Calgary was turning 11 on Saturday, and he wanted to mail it Monday, and he had not been able to make the girl at the counter understand about the card, that he'd left it on the shelf back there, because he wasn't sure he could afford all 3. Ren felt that one land in her chest like a stone dropped down a well. "Okay," she said out loud now, turning to Priya, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "He's deaf, he's not being difficult, he just can't hear you. He's got coffee and cream. And there's a birthday card he set down because he wasn't sure about the total. Can you ring through what he's got and I'll grab the card?" Something shifted in Priya's face. The relief of a teenager who'd been handed a problem too big and was now mercifully handed the solution to. "Oh," she said. "Oh, okay, yes. Sorry, I didn't realize." "Nobody does," Ren said. "It's okay." She went and found the card. It took her a moment among the rack of glossy cardboard. Too many of them were for grown-ups, anniversaries and sympathies. But near the bottom she found a row of kids' ones, and there was a glittery purple thing with a cartoon horse on the front, and the number 11 made of stars. And she knew without knowing how that this was the one, that a man like Anders would have picked exactly this for a granddaughter he couldn't visit. It was $4.99 yen. She brought it back. Anders saw the card in her hand and made a small sound, the only sound he'd made the whole time, a soft involuntary "oh" that came from a place words don't reach, and his eyes went bright and wet at the rims. Jen laid the card on the belt with his coffee and his little carton of cream, and here was where she made the decision that she would turn over in her mind for weeks afterward, lying awake doing the arithmetic of her own life. The total came up. Anders reached into his coat with shaking fingers and pulled out a worn nylon wallet held shut with an elastic band, and he counted out coins onto the rubber mat, slow, a toonie, some loonies, a small heartbreaking pile of dimes and nickels, and Ren watched him count and saw that it was going to be short. Not by much. By about $2. And she watched him realize it the same moment she did, watched him start to push the card back toward Priya. His hands already forming the apology. Take it back, just the coffee." "No," Ren said. And she dug into the front pocket of her jeans where she'd shoved her own loose change at lunch, and she put a toonie and a loonie down on the mat next to his. $3. It was $3 she did not have. It was the difference between the cheap milk and no milk. She knew that even as she did it. She signed it to him so he'd understand, because she didn't want him to feel it as charity, she wanted him to feel it as what it was. "The card stays," she signed. "Your granddaughter gets her horse. Okay?" Anders looked at the $3, then he looked at her. And the old man's face, which had held itself together through the loud girl and the sighing man and the long humiliating wait, finally came apart, quietly, with great dignity, the way ice goes off a river in spring. Not all at once, but all the way through. He didn't sob. He just let his eyes fill and spill over, and he didn't wipe them, and he signed slow, "Thank you. Thank you, I'm sorry. Thank you." "Don't be sorry," Ren signed. "Never be sorry for that." The store had gone quiet again. But it was a different quiet now. The parka man wasn't sighing anymore. The woman with the phone had put it away. The kid in the hockey jacket was watching the two pairs of hands move with the particular fascination of someone realizing, for the first time, that there are whole languages happening in the air around him, that he never learned to see. Priya bagged the coffee and the cream and the card very carefully, like they were eggs, and when she handed the little bag across, she did something Ren wouldn't have expected from a tired 17-year-old. She looked right at Anders, and she put her own hand flat against her chest, and then moved it forward toward him. "Thank you." She'd seen Ren do it. She'd copied it exactly. She didn't know it was probably the most important thing she'd do all week. Anders received it like a gift. He nodded at her, and he tapped his fingers from his chin outward. "Thank you back," and beamed. It should have ended there. In a different kind of evening it would have ended there. Two strangers, a small kindness, the line moving on. Ren went back for her basket, half expecting Anders to gather his little bag and slip out into the cold the way people do, grateful and gone. But when she'd paid for her own bread and peanut butter and macaroni, and the milk she could now barely afford, she came out the sliding doors into the slap of February air, and found him standing there under the buzzing light of the store sign, in the falling snow, waiting for her. Not pushy, just waiting. The way you wait for someone you've decided not to lose track of quite yet. The cold out there was the serious kind. The Northern Ontario kind that Environment Canada had been warning about all day on the radio. -28 with the wind, the kind of cold that makes the snow squeak under your boots. And the streetlights wear halos. Anders had a toque jammed down over his white hair and his good wool coat that wasn't nearly enough. And he was holding his little bag against his chest, and when he saw her come out his hands lifted again. "Where do you live?" he asked. "On Beck Street," she signed. "Not far I walk." He frowned at that. A fatherly frown, and he pointed to the far corner of the lot, where an enormous ancient Buick sat under a fresh white blanket, the only car in the lot wearing that much snow, which meant he'd been inside a long time before she ever got there. Working up the courage at that counter. "Too cold to walk," he signed. "I'd drive you." Ren almost said no. She had a lifetime of reasons to say no to rides from strange men in dark parking lots, and her body knew them all. But she looked at Anders, at his soft worried eyes and his hands that had wept $3 worth of gratitude onto a rubber mat 10 minutes ago. And the reasons didn't fit him. Thank you. The Buick took 3 tries to turn over and then rumbled to life with a heater that smelled like every old car she'd ever been in. Dust and warm vinyl and faintly of pipe tobacco that must have soaked into the seats decades ago. He drove the way old men drive, in winter, both hands, very slow, the wipers thunking. They couldn't sign, of course, not with him driving, and so for a few blocks they sat in a silence that was, for once in Ren's life, completely comfortable. At a red light he turned to her and tapped his chest, and then made a little questioning shape, and she understood. How do you know? How do you sign? She held up one finger. Wait. And at the next red light she answered him. My brother, she signed. He was deaf. Soren, he died 9 years ago. She spelled the name. She hadn't spelled it for anyone in a long time. Car accident. He was 22. The light changed. Anders drove a slow half block before the next stop let him answer, and when he did, his hands were gentle. How old were you? When he was born. 4. She smiled in the dark of the car. I learned to sign before I learned to read. Our mother didn't, really. Our father didn't, so it was me. I was the one who talked for him. Her hand slowed. When he died I stopped. Nobody to talk to. Anders nodded for a long time. Then, at the stop sign at the bottom of Beck Street, he signed something that Ren would carry around for the rest of her life. Your hands didn't forget him, he signed. They were just waiting. She had to look out the window for a moment after that. He pulled up in front of her building, a tired 3-story walk-up, with a snowbank up to the second-floor windowsills, and a porch light that had been out since November because the landlord wouldn't fix it. And here Ren did something she also couldn't entirely explain afterward, except that the cold and the kindness, and her dead brother's name in the air between them, had loosened something in her. She invited him up. Just for a coffee, she signed, since he'd bought coffee anyway, just to warm up before the long drive back to wherever he lived. I have a son, she added. Jonah. He's 7. He's going to want to know everything about you. Anders's whole face lit at the word son. Jonah was, in fact, on the neighbor's couch, half asleep in front of the TV, and when Ren came to collect him he was cranky and dragging, until he saw there was a stranger, an old man, a real old man, with white hair and a magnificent coat, coming up the stairs behind his mother. And then he was wide awake and full of the relentless openness of a 7-year-old, who has never yet learned to be afraid of anyone. Who are you? He demanded. Jonah, Ren said. This is my friend Anders. He can't hear, buddy. He talks with his hands, like Uncle Soren. Remember I showed you? Jonah had never met Soren. Soren had died 5 years before Joe. The thing I keep coming back to is the basket. Ren had $31 and a face-down hydro bill and 2 feet that had stopped being feet, and she set her grocery basket down on the floor of that store and walked toward the very problem. Everyone else in the line was busy ignoring. Nothing made her do it. That's what I find I can't get past. There was no reward waiting, no camera, no one keeping score. There was only a tired woman deciding, in the last 30 seconds of her patience, that the old man at the till was a person and not an inconvenience. And everything good that came after, the breakfast on the stove, the key in the coat pocket, the flock of little wooden birds on the windowsill. All of it grew out of that one small, unglamorous choice to do the decent thing when it cost her something. Because it did cost her. That's the part we skip when we tell ourselves we'd have done the same. Ren put down $3 she genuinely did not have, $3 that were the difference between milk and no milk, and she did it anyway. That's not a feeling. A feeling is cheap. That was character, the quiet backbone kind, the kind that shows up most clearly when nobody's watching and you're broke and exhausted and you choose kindness regardless. But decency on its own wouldn't have been enough. And I think that's worth sitting with. Plenty of people in that line had soft hearts. What Ren had that they didn't was the wisdom to actually look. To read the room. To notice that Anders wasn't being difficult, he was deaf, and that the cure for his loneliness was as simple as moving into his sight line and lifting her hands. Caring is common. Paying close enough attention to know what someone truly needs is rare. And it's a thing you can grow in yourself if you decide to. And then there's the part I admire most, which is that Ren had been knocked flat by life. A brother buried at 22, a marriage gone, 2 jobs, a porch light out since November. And she had every reason in the world to have nothing left to give. Grief like that hardens most people. Hers didn't. She'd been carrying that ache for 9 years and still found something to spend on a stranger. That kind of staying tender under pressure, that refusal to let hardship turn you cold, is its own quiet strength. And it's the strength I'd most like to learn from her. I don't think the lesson is just be kind. The lesson is the 3 of them together. Be the kind of person who'll do right when it costs you, sharp enough to see what's actually needed, and strong enough to keep your heart open even when life has given you every excuse to close it. Ren had Soren's name in her hands and $3 in her pocket, and she gave both away, and somehow ended up richer than before.